discuss this, we've got Professor Mike Wilson joining us here from Portland State University. And Professor, thank you very much for being here and for joining us to talk about this. Really excited to discuss this topic. Before we do, just to introduce yourself to everybody, would you mind letting everyone know a little bit about yourself?
Hey, well, Greg, thanks again for having me on the show. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to be able to be on local TV here, being able to speak to our community about such a important event to our community and also to our country. And it's a really special time that we're getting to see our communities come together and bond over such a meaningful experience. So my name is Professor Mike Wilson, and I am the sports psychology professor at Portland State. I work with athletes and coaches on the mental side of performance. And this also extends to organizations as well. And when we talk about mental performance or sports psychology in general, what that really means is we're looking at the role of psychology in behavior when it comes to sport. So we're talking about things like motivation, we're talking about confidence, we're talking about things like leadership, team cohesion, communication, roles. So it's really a whole gambit. And when we look at a special event like the World Cup, it really highlights all of the different demands that are put on these human beings beyond just playing the tactical and technical side of the sport. So it's a really important conversation because when we see a clash of cultures like in a World Cup, it really expresses the differences and the nuances between how we perceive and how we experience our sports. And it really highlights the fact that sport is a reflection of our culture, and our culture is a reflection of our identity. And we see that played out in these competitions. And that also it helps us explain why we see different performances from different teams at different levels, which I'm sure you've got loads of questions about as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think a lot of people are fond of saying when it comes to any kind of, athletic competition is on paper, it looks like these two teams were pretty matched up. Maybe the U.S. Having one of their best years potentially when it comes to a World Cup team. Belgium, on paper, not looking as good as they used to be. When they get on the field, it could not have been more polar opposite than that. And I think a lot of it was, looking at the U.S. team, it seemed like, and this is me not being a professional athlete, not being somebody who's on there, so merely judging, watching through a television, but it seemed like they weren't mentally there, that they weren't as prepared, or they seemed almost afraid just by looking at body language. What are some of the factors you think that went into that for the U.S. team, and do you think that was a factor, the mental, the psychological aspect of it?
Greg, there's something that is very unique about a World Cup competition that's so different from other, global competitions that we might think of. And part of that is the emotional demand placed on these athletes. So it's a really great example looking at the Belgium-US game yesterday, because although we have very talented and gifted players, there's an element that we still miss as a country, and that was really highlighted yesterday. And what that is the internalization of our belief of soccer. So what I mean by that is when we see a country like Belgium play against the United States, what we see is the contrast between a way of life, soccer as a way of life, and soccer as something that you just do. And when we look at the competitive level of American athletes, American soccer players, and where they play at on a regular basis, all of the 4 years in between World Cups, we see that their competitive levels aren't as high or as regular as, like, for example, the squad we see that Belgium fielded yesterday. So, for example, in between the 4 years of each World Cup, there are tons of qualifying rounds and little tournaments that you have to play. Now, why this is important is because where the United States is situated is we play a plethora of teams that don't compete at a very high level. And when you do this regularly, that sets the expectation and the behavioral norms for how to perform under pressure. So why that matters is because teams like from Europe and South America, they're constantly playing very high levels on a regular basis. So what that means then is when it comes to a big tournament like the World Cup, where every single game is demanding your absolute best, you can only do that for so long if you haven't had very much experience doing it. So what I think some of what we saw yesterday was the maximum capacity of our players' emotional abilities. And because the Belgium players are regularly playing at the top leagues all around Europe all year around, and then all of the 4 years in between the World Cup, Belgium is playing top quality European teams, they have the capacity to endure several games one after the other with that expectation and that demand of concentration, of emotional regulation, of attentional control. And our players just don't have that because of where they play in their careers. So if we want to address that as a country, then U.S. soccer, from the managerial positions on down to youth soccer, we need to be looking at how we develop a culture and a belief system that can be internalized and transmitted to generations, like what other countries have been doing. So in a part of that, this might be a hot take or might be a viral clip for you guys, but my biggest recommendation to national team coaches going into the World Cup was to always have a box of puppies or kittens in the locker room. Now, the reason why is because of the role that cortisol and the stress hormone plays in a tournament like this, right? So my prediction was that whoever was going to win the World Cup was going to be the team that could limit the amount of cortisol present in the locker room. Okay. Why this is important is because cortisol is our stress hormone, and we need it to be able to perform at very high levels. We need it to tell our heart to pump really hard. We need it to tell our muscles to contract and tighten. Okay. And it's really good for the time that it's needed. What the problem is with cortisol is when it lingers beyond the event that it's needed for. And for most of us on a day-to-day basis, our cortisol levels are probably pretty high because we have constant threats like bills and responsibilities that never go away. Whereas as soon as you're done playing a soccer game, the threat, the stress is done, right? But some teams, some even individual players are better at managing this post-game so that they can enter a quicker recovery period. So if you're unable to do this, that means the stress hormone is lingering in your body for longer, which is telling your body that it still needs to stay active and attentive to any potential threats. So the research that was really interesting, actually, was done out of Washington State University, and they studied 200 plus subjects and had them have hand-to-touch contact with either puppies or kittens. And within 10 minutes, there was a significant decrease in the stress hormone cortisol. So after every single U.S. game, I would have been telling Mauricio Pochettino that they needed to have puppies and kittens there in the locker room and allow the players to have time to decompress before going on to anything else.
To get them ready to take that stress away so that they can then utilize it in the next match. That's fascinating.
Exactly.
Yeah. I like that idea of having I mean, yeah, well, that's going to calm you down. Get some puppies and kittens in there. I mean, at the end of the day, you get over, yeah.
Absolutely.
That's fascinating. Do you know of any teams that actually do that?
No, I don't. But if you do hear,
Team USA needs to talk to you.
Team USA needs to talk to us. Yeah, absolutely. That is something that I firmly believe would have been a huge factor, because you have to be able to take a evaluation of the psychological framework of the team that you have put together. So if we know that we aren't as exposed to high stress environments, that means that we have less of an idea of how we are going to react in those moments. Okay. And one of the interesting things about confidence is that we think like, oh, okay, we have to have confidence before we do something, right? And a lot of times we prevent ourselves from doing things because we say, oh, I don't feel confident enough. I don't think I can do this, right? But the funny thing about confidence is that confidence is something that you only get in response as a result of having done something. So we're waiting to be confident when we're actually waiting to do the thing that can actually give us the confidence. So why that matters with all of this and in this conversation is because if we can get players in a position where they can regulate their emotional responses more effectively, that means that they are going to be able to conserve their energy and use it with more intention and purpose, rather than being in a situation that the moment feels like it's too big and it's too overwhelming. Just having a very clear direction about what our roles and responsibilities are. And we can do that more effectively when our body is in a state of rest and relaxation.
And I love the idea of puppies or kittens being able to help facilitate that aspect of it. Another question I had is, do you think that the reversal of the red card had any effect on the psychology of the players for either the U.S. or for the players for Belgium?
You know, that is a really good question, and one that's been circling around a lot in the sport world right now. And there's a lot of different ways that it could be taken, especially in terms of the psychological impact of the team. And obviously one of the biggest challenges that you have as a player in a tournament like this, when you have so many eyes on you and so much expectation, is balancing your values and your actions. So where it could have had a negative impact on the team is if there were team members that didn't agree with that decision and didn't agree with that process. So if that did occur, then something that is called cognitive dissonance would have been experienced by these players. And cognitive dissonance is when we have values or beliefs and we behave or act contradictory to them. Okay. And so if you're going out there and playing for your country because you love your country, but yet your country has made decisions that you don't necessarily agree with, yeah, that can cause some frustration and some confusion and maybe even some uncertainty within the squad. And then, of course, for Floor Balogun himself, what do you do as a player when you are put in a position like that, when you have no say, but yet your name is being thrown into this very contentious situation, and you're still being asked to perform and play for your country? So that in and of itself, too, could also cause a little bit of dissension within the team, because you could have other players, if they are not fully committed to the idea of a team concept and their role within the team, there could absolutely be feelings of jealousy or feelings of selfishness that somebody else should be playing, and that, you know, rules should be followed and X, Y, and Z. Because you got to remember, at the end of the day, with big tournaments like this is a huge platform for these players and coaches even, for their careers to get exposure, whether that's to get, you know, more contracts or to get trades or whatever it might look like. So everybody has a vested interest in playing these games beyond just playing for your country. And when you start to have all of these logistical interruptions, and ethical dilemmas, we'll say, it can cause a lot of confusion and uncertainty within the team. And one of the biggest threats to the brain is uncertainty. Okay, so when there's uncertainty of expectations, when there's uncertainty of not knowing what the fans think about you, or wondering if your fans and supporters are questioning your character and your integrity, those are all things that for sure would be swirling around these players' minds at some point. But how that was discussed in the locker room and how the coaches addressed that, you know, I can only hope that there was something that was discussed, but it definitely looked like there was something else going on, because the performance that we saw was so night and day to the previous three matches. So it's hard to not imagine that the stuff that was going off the field was definitely impacting on the field. And, you know, we saw in the reaction of the Belgium players and team when they would celebrate and score, they were taunting the whole situation, right? So maybe it fired up the Belgian team too. But it was an unfortunate situation that the U.S. team got put in, and for them never having had to experience that before, and with the maturity levels on the team, it's really a question of what was the conversation like among the players, and were they all on the same page? Because you get the feeling that they weren't all on the same page out there last night. And you can only imagine that was in some part a reflection of what was going on.
It makes perfect sense. Well, this has been a really fascinating, analysis of what's happening there, and a way to think about this too, Professor. Thank you very much, for joining us to have this discussion and to think about that. I definitely think that every locker room. Well, now I'm going to be an advocate for puppies here as well, just for stressful breaking news situations. That should be a requirement, but that's another conversation. But man, thank you very much.
It absolutely is.
Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time and being here.
Yes, thank you, Greg. We'll see you next time, all right?
Absolutely. And for everybody watching, thanks for joining us. This is Fox 12 Now. We've got to get to a break, so we're going to do that. We'll continue on. We've got a lot of conversations we're going to have, but very fun one there with Professor Wilson from Portland State University. So stick right with us. We'll be right back after this break with more.